They say that you never forget your first kill, whether it's in love or battle. But even though the character we're about to discuss with you guys wasn't Guts' first apostle kill, he has definitely gone on to become his most important one, and yes, that includes Wild and Rosine. The Slug Count appeared in a half-dozen chapters during the Black Swordsman arc of Berserk at best, and while his screen time was short, considering that was an intro arc, he left a lasting impact on the series. It's thanks to him that we now know many things about an apostle's body, chief of which is the fact that their reincarnations aren't one-offs in every case, as you'll learn by the end of this video. So stick around and put on your Berserker helms, it's time we took a good look at the anatomy of the Slug Count, Berserk's most important apostle, at least from a narrative standpoint. But before we jump to that, we have a small request. If you enjoy our content, please give this video a massive thumbs up, share it with your friends, and smash that subscribe button with the notification bell turned to all while you're at it. It helps us create more of the content you love and bring in more marvelous viewers like yourself. Now, let's get into it. How did the Slug Count become an apostle? How did that process change him? The Slug Count was the third apostle introduced to Berserk from a chronological standpoint, because he came in right after the Snake Baron and that one female apostle Guts kills in the opening shot of Berserk. You know the one we're talking about. While those two were in the story to show us how powerful apostles could be, and Guts vice versa, Slug Count's narrative purpose was different. He was brought in to explain how apostles are created, and trust us, it isn't a pretty creation story by any means. About a decade ago, this apostle was the human leader of the town we see Guts enter in the third chapter of the Black Swordsman arc. He was a heretic hunter back then as well, and many of his people did think of him as a tyrant, but he wasn't someone who abused his power as a noble inquisitor like Mozgus did. Rather, the Count used to be a man of righteous faith, and such adherents always come off as fanatics to those who don't believe in God's words. Still, he didn't mind being seen as a monster by some of his people because there were many among them that saw the truth of his mission, and besides, he had a beautiful wife and a loving daughter to return home to. A family that nourished him as much as he nourished them. But all that changed when one day the Count returned home from a heretic hunt to find his wife in the worst imaginable situation for a man of faith like him, in the middle of a pagan orgy. And to make things even worse, it didn't look like she was coerced into organizing it, she made it happen of her own volition. Seeing his wife's face writhing in unholy pleasure in the midst of a sea of flesh made the Count black out with rage, and he killed every single person in that room except for his wife. He couldn't bring himself to kill her because he loved her so much, and perhaps she knew it, which is why she played him like this. When the Count came upon her with his blood-soaked sword, he hesitated, and she reached out for him, as if asking him to embrace her like he always did. She knew that no matter how mad he got at her, he couldn't actually bring himself to kill her, which is where she was both right and wrong. She was in the right that yes, the Count couldn't bring himself to kill her with his own hand. When he realized that he wasn't going to be able to reconcile what she had just done and what he was about to do with the way he had lived his life so far, he gave in to his despair and took the help of an object he received from a merchant that came to him from an eastern bazaar. A behelit. When the Count's despair, blood, and desire flowed into the behelit, things were out of his hand and they fell directly into the grasp of the God Hand, showing us how apostles are created for the first time. Behelits were introduced to the series as metaphysical keys that can summon the God Hand, but turns out, Guts only had half the facts on its full functionality. Behelits can only be used by the people they're meant for, and only at the moment those people crave for the power to overcome their situation. Outside of that, they're pretty much useless rocks for those not destined to use them. For those who are, though, they have a very transactional model for sharing power. Make a sacrifice, and in exchange, you receive the power of evil. A behelit opens a fissure in the heart of the person who activates it, and should they accept the God Hand's conditions, which in Slug Count's case was sacrificing his beloved wife, that fissure is then filled with the power of the Abyss, linking the person to it and turning them into an apostle. When Slug Count became an apostle, he sealed his crossover by devouring the very woman he couldn't bring himself to lay a finger upon a few moments ago. Turning into an apostle doesn't just give you demonic powers, though that's obviously there as well. It also changes your previously human personality, alters it, makes it less human, more heartless. The Count was a hard man before he became an apostle, and he did cruel things in the pursuit of his faith. But after becoming an apostle, heretic burning became an excuse. He just wanted bodies to be violated, chopped up, and devoured. The Count looked and smelled like a corpse, but when you got close to him, the bloodlust that came off him clearly told you that this guy was very much alive, and not exactly human either. his only goal became slaking his own perverted desires, besides innate servitude to the God Hand. And this is something that happens to 99% of all apostles. They're reduced to mortal shells filled with nothing but malevolence and hatred, which they take out on whoever they can find. In Guts' case, the Count was already familiar with his reputation as the Black Swordsman, and he was eager to put him to the test. And, in doing so, he revealed the extent of his own strength, which is massive to say the very least. What powers did the Slug Count gain after becoming an apostle? Can he match up with Zod? Even in his human form, the Slug Count is immensely powerful. He's introduced to the series in the middle of an execution. His executioner beheads a suspected heretic in the town square and lets the head fall into the crowd. Guts picks it up, draws the brand of sacrifice on it, and lobs it at the Count to let him know that he's coming for him. The Count is thrilled by this declaration of war, and he crushes the head he had just caught like an overripe melon with his bare hands. Regular people had no chance of standing up to him. He might have looked too big to be able to move swiftly, but when he restrained a rampaging Zondark in the blink of an eye, Slug Count proved that size wasn't the metric you should be using to gauge his speed. Only a cannon-blasting, dragon-slayer-slashing, city-leveling madman like Guts could have fought the base form of Slug Count on an even peg, so when the Apostle realized this, he upped his own game. The Count's transform state is the reason he's called the Slug Count. He takes the form of a monstrous demonic slug that is as tall as the halls of his castle and half as wide as well. He has 2 faces, 2 humongous arms, and a pair of tendrils that act as auxiliary limbs. With these tendrils, the Count can whip around his enemies and even set up decoys, like when he uses Pippin's body to fake out Guts during the eclipse. Cutting off his limbs isn't exactly a great idea, because not only can the Count regenerate them, they come back bigger and stronger than they previously were, which means you're actually making him stronger the more you hurt him. And he's already strong as all hell, because the Count was ragdolling Guts in their first fight for the most part. He bulldozed through pillars and castle walls made with fortified stone like they were styrofoam props, and the Count broke many of Guts' bones during their brief but explosive encounter. All of this makes him sound like Nosferatu's Zod in a way, doesn't it? The regeneration, the unparalleled strength, the smacking Guts about inside of a castle the first time they meet, but the Count isn't anywhere near Zod in terms of strength because, number 1, Zod is still alive and the Count didn't make it past the first arc, and number 2, he still possessed a human weakness that Guts ended up exploiting in order to defeat him, something we don't think Zod has. Even after becoming an apostle and having his heart frozen by the abyss, the Count still held one person very close to his heart, and that was his daughter. Teresia filled the hole that her mother had left behind for him. In that, she became the new object of the Count's humanity. And no, not that way, you pervs, he's not the king of Midland. In the 7 years he had spent as an apostle, not once had his daughter allowed him to treat herself like his daughter, because she was afraid of what her father had done, but more so, what her father had become. Teresia hadn't seen the Count's demonic form, but she knew he had changed, so when she finally did see it during Guts' fight with the Count, it threw the latter completely off balance from a mental perspective. Guts abused the father's love for his daughter by holding the daughter hostage and then running Dragonslayer through the middle of the Count's heads, separating both of them. He needed his arm cannon to soften them up too, which just goes to show you how goddamn resilient these God Hand servants can be. But Guts has never been able to decapitate Zod or even mentally and physically torture him the way he did Slug Count, so to compare these two apostles would be blasphemy. Zod has been alive for 300 years, fought Skull Knight multiple times and survived, and will seemingly keep living even if you take off his head. Slug Count, on the other hand, was scared of the Skull Knight when they met, and he has only been an apostle for 7 years. So, while he is an exceptionally strong apostle, yes, he isn't in Zod's league when it comes to strength or self-control, because the Count is a self-indulgent glutton. But the one place where he has an advantage over the Immortal One is the fact that he can channel his powers through a pseudo of his own creation. How can Slug Count create pseudo-apostles? Is it related to his anatomy? You can find out more about what pseudo-apostles are exactly from our video on them, check out our Berserk playlist, but for this video what matters is how they're created, and Slug Count gives us a pretty decent crash course on that subject. When he turns Zondark into a pseudo, he makes the captain swallow a parasite of his own creation, which then takes hold within Zondark and turns him into the Count's mindless killing machine. Zondark is bestowed with powers that are similar to his master's, as he can manipulate his limbs into tendril-like appendages to increase the range and lethality of his attacks. But, in the end, He is the Count's slave, and Slug Count can even talk through Zondark when he needs to. This is because pseudo-apostles share an innate link to their creators thanks to the way apostle powers work. An apostle draws their strength from the abyss. When they create soldiers for themselves, they basically portion out a part of this strength and encode it with loyalty to their cause so that pseudo-apostles never rebel against their creators. Not every apostle has this power though, because we've only seen 3 apostles create pseudos in the entire series: Rosine, the egg of the perfect world, and Slug Count himself. That puts him in an elite class of apostles that not even Zod is a part of, and it's all because of the way he manipulates his own apostle anatomy. But doing all this still didn't get him the win he so desperately wanted against Guts. When the Count knew he was down for the count, and his time on planet Earth was limited, he did something we didn't think should be possible. He activated his Behelit once again. Fate has a funny way of working itself into situations like this because it was Guts who made the Count's reunion with his Behelit possible, and had the Count gone through with what was offered to him next, it would have been the end of the world as we know it. Why was Slug Count chosen for a double reincarnation? Can every apostle receive this kind of power-up? Though we didn't have any context for the Count being offered a chance at a second reincarnation back when the Black Swordsman arc was being published, after seeing what happened to Ganishka, we can't help but think that the Count was meant to fulfill that role. Not every apostle is offered a chance at a second reincarnation. In fact, the Count is the only known case of someone being offered that chance in the series. Ganishka forced his second reincarnation and it made him lose his mind and turn into a Cthulhu-esque monster. But had Slug Count accepted the offer to sacrifice his daughter in exchange for a second reincarnation, which is what the God Hand demanded after he activated his Behelit a second time, he'd have become a fully conscious vessel for the creation of the new world. When Griffith causes the great roar of the astral world, he says he had anticipated Skull Knight's ambush because number 1, he had a predictable pattern, but number 2, causality was converged because of his emergence. Griffith says that one who has been reincarnated twice and a sword stroke that reaches deeper still within the bowels of the spirit world have opened the door. We've paraphrased it a little here, but you got that first bit, right? An apostle reincarnated twice was one of the trigger conditions for the global eclipse Berserk finds itself stuck in now. And had the Count accepted the God Hand's offer of a second reincarnation, it would have happened a very long time ago. But he didn't, because he loves his daughter. And that's how we learned the ultimate fate of every apostle in the story. Slug Count was the first apostle whose soul we saw dragged to hell from a chronological perspective, and it showed us that even in death, those who deal with the devil are destined to be eternally tortured. When apostles die, their souls are dragged into the vortex of souls to become a part of it, forever. The Count decided to spare his daughter that fate and shoulder that responsibility for himself, but in the end, all he could have done was get an extension on his lease on life. If he accepted the double reincarnation, he'd have died anyway, because killing Ganishka with Skull Knight's temporal sword strike is what changed the world. And if the Count sacrificed his daughter just to be used as a lamb himself, well, you don't need us to tell you how soul-shattering that would be. Marvelous verdict! And speaking of soul-shattering, we're afraid that this is where the breakdown will have to end, because that's all we've got for you on this guy. The Slug Count wasn't the strongest apostle, nor was he the most clever, but he was the most important because of the many ways in which he explained and influenced the ongoing narrative of Berserk. He not only showed us how apostles were made, he showed us how they died, what happened when they died, and he was also a teaser for the end of the world as we knew it, way before Miura even thought up the Great Roar. It's a testament to his writing ability, but that's enough out of us. We want to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, strugglers.